morning's coffee with a consulting forester. Welcome everybody. Vermont Coverts and Vermont Woodlands Association are really happy to continue to sponsor these morning conversations with professionals in the forestry world. Today we have Markus Bradley from Red Start Forestry. He's a consulting forester, and I'm actually just going to turn it over to Markus and let him tell us a little bit about his background, what drew him to forestry, what he does as a consulting forester, and then we'll open it up to questions. I ask that you mute yourselves so we don't have all the background noise, and you can type your questions in the chat box and I'll read them off to Markus. We can ask for some clarification, or if you raise your hand and you really want to talk, then we'll do our best to kind of call on you. Since it's a smaller number, we can probably do that. So with that, Markus, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, good morning. I'm definitely familiar with a number of faces out there, and I'm glad to be here. I'll give you a little background on myself. I grew up in Calais, Vermont. My folks own about 65 acres. Actually, they just sold it to my older brother, so they've moved on. But about the time I was a junior in high school, my folks were having a timber sale, and I got to hang out with a gentleman named Paul Kate, who's a consulting forester, or retired now, in the area, and it definitely piqued my interest in the industry. Prior to that, I definitely had an interest in fishing and hunting, and that is, I think, a solid introduction for a lot of the young people that I meet is the sports, fishing and hunting, and it's terrific. But anyways, Paul was terrific. He took me under his wing, and basically showed me what was going on. I did take 1 year off between high school and college, and then I went to Paul Smith's for 2 years. And in the summers and in the breaks, Paul's kind of an interesting guy. He likes to log probably more than do consulting forester. So I got good experience logging with Paul in a tractor and a winch, so relatively small scale equipment. And I did that during the summers and Christmas breaks and any break that I had time. And did my 2 years at Paul Smith's, and then I went to UVM and for another couple of years. That I continued to work with Paul, but the last summer that I was at UVM, I actually went out to Northern California, and I worked one summer for Sierra Pacific Industries, spending the summer inventory trees. It was mostly, we were stationed out near Mount Lassen Volcanic National Park for most of the summer, and then the matriarch of the company passed away, and her estate needed to be inventoried, so they shipped us off to Arcata, California for about 5 weeks, doing inventory. So that was a really cool experience. I graduated from UVM, and actually the next summer I spent working in Maine. I met my wife in UVM, so I decided against going back to California. I decided I'd stay east, and so I started working for Joe Nelson out of Bristol, Vermont, and spent a summer in what I would call the pulp lands of Maine, swatting flies, and so I had kind of a cool experience. So I've got a pretty good cross section of what it's like from coast to coast, and sort of the industry, or at least what the industry was at the time. And about 1998, just prior to the 1998 ice storm, I was looking for something a little bit more permanent. And my cousin, who's a forester from Stratford, a woman named T. McLean, had been working part-time for Ginny Barlow. And Ginny reluctantly hired me for a couple days a week, which was kind of fun. And to my great fortune, and nobody else's great fortune, the 1998 ice storm came rolling in literally about 10 days after Ginny had hired me, and Orange County was beat on pretty hard during the ice storm. And so my part-time job turned into a full-time job pretty quickly. And a few years later, I think Ginny made me a partner in the business. Ginny is, you all know Ginny, I'm sure. She's since retired. A couple years after starting, Ben Machin came along, And so Ben and I are the primary owners of Red Start Forestry. We've continued to expand and grow. We have about 1,100 forestry clients, non-industrial clients. We also do work for some municipalities. We do work for some conservation groups. In recent years, we've gotten pretty heavily also into restoration work. This last year, we planted about 23,000 trees. Some of these are riparian plantings. Some of these are upland plantings. We do a lot of invasive plant work. I think we controlled invasive plants on around 1,000 acres of land last year. So we've had an invasive plant crew or restoration crew for the better part of a decade, and so that's really helped broaden our impact, I guess, and it's been interesting, fun. In recent years, I've really actually fallen in love with botany. So I got into all this because I like chainsaws and logging equipment and forestry and wildlife habitat. And in the last few years, botany has kind of become a love for me. I'm an amateur. I don't know every plant, but I've really started to appreciate it. And it's actually invasive plant control that probably helped broaden my horizon there. So right now we have about a dozen people working at Red Start Forestry. The full-time year-round staff is about 7 people. We hire on mostly these are kids who've just graduated college, entry level, and it's been fun. I think we make an effort to work them hard to get the invasive plant work control, but it also expose them to forestry, to logging, to tree planting, to different different aspects of the field, and I think it's been actually really rewarding. Dana Hazen's a young man that is going to become a partner in the business. We're working on those details right now. Dana started working for me for about eight years ago, and he was a Paul Smith grad who was mowing lawns when he first started working for us, and it's been terrific to watch him evolve. You know, Tyler Mousley's who's now the head forester at the Rygate Power Plant, started the same time Dana did, and he moved on. But it's been really fun to watch some of these young folks, really become professionals and grow. So that's my basic introduction. I'm married. I have 3 children, and I like what I do. So nobody should feel bad for me.
Well, that's awesome, Marcus. Thanks so much for sharing. And it's kind of funny starting to be on that other end of watching the younger people come up and get that experience. I know I'm seeing the same things, and I'm like, no, that's not possible. I'm not where you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you become the old guy?
That's exactly it.
Yeah,
Exactly it.
Yeah.
Enough of that conversation.
Marcus, let me kick it off with a question. We kind of hit everybody up with this one. Do you have a favorite tree? If so, what is it and why?
I don't have a favorite tree. There's lots of most every species that's native. I definitely appreciate. There's certain trees I'm super excited about. I'm really excited about chestnut at the moment. Dave Matthews is here. We've had a fantastic project in the Fairleytown Forest where we actually planted 21 of the newest chestnut back crosses, and it's actually part of the Rivendell curriculum right now. And so every year we go measure these trees that we got from the Chestnut Foundation, and I get to go in, talk to the students, tell them what the chestnut tree was, what happened to it, the science behind the breeding, and then we get to get them into the woods and do some maintenance, do some measurement, and expose the kids to the Forestry 101. That I'm pretty excited about. But any nice specimen of any species that we have is just meaningful.
As long as you bring up chestnut, and Kathleen, you might be able to pop in on this one too. I understand there's a USDA petition to deregulate chestnut. I'm just learning about that. What's the story on that?
So the chestnut that they're talking about is actually a genetically modified chestnut. They actually inserted in, this is happening in Syracuse, they inserted a wheat gene into a chestnut embryo. The chestnut blight, the fungus kills the tree above ground through the production of oxalic acid, and this wheat gene it produces oxalic oxidase, and it helps break down the acid. And so the trees are showing great promise. The traditional backbreeding approach, it's a fascinating story. I won't go into it too much, but basically the original theory, this is the way I understand it, you can fact check it, but they figured something like 5 or 6 genes were responsible for tolerance or resistance in the chestnut tree, and through genomic testing, they've gotten along further. It's more like 25 genes that are responsible. So the B3F3 chestnut back cross is likely to be a failure, and these trees will live and grow for 25 or 30 years, but they're not likely to be resistant to the blight. Now, these transgenic trees are apparently showing great promise, and it obviously opens up a huge ethical debate about genetically modified plants, but it's certainly something that I'm interested in. I'd like to see the species restored. And actually, the way I understand it now is that the Chestnut Foundation, apparently, if you take a transgenic chestnut and another transgenic chestnut and you start crossing them, there's a phenomenon called gene silencing, in which the benefit of the oxalic oxidase will actually start to dampen or neutralize. So what they really want now is they want to be able to take the transgenic trees and cross them with pure Americans or some of these traditionally backbreeding trees like we have in the Fairleytown forest. So I would say stay tuned.
Kathleen, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, no, it does seem like that genetic engineering is going to help, certainly, with some of our issues. But there's also controversy.
Sure.
Yeah, that's always the hard part. And I know some of the certification standards, especially those that come out of Europe, are not accepting, any genetically modified forests as certified, and there's a long ways to go,
right,
before that is a solution.
Right.
All right. Well, thanks for that update. Let me ask you a question. You talked a little bit about invasives and your restoration crew. If I, as a landowner, wanted them to come do work on my property, how does that happen? And do they treat all of, like on my property, I've got barberry and I've got buckthorn and I've got, do they treat everything, or are they targeted in what they're doing?
So we're most of the time treating woodies. We've done some herbaceous plants control as well, garlic mustard or chervil or poison parsnip or wild parsnip. But most of the time it's going to be the woodies. It's going to be the either buckthorn, the barberries, non-native honeysuckle, bittersweet, black swallowwort. There's a number of plants. Most of the time, I try to get my clients to pursue natural resource conservation funding. I don't view owning woodland and growing trees for profit as an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. So, and it's not usually a problem that the owners ask for, so or are responsible for. And so I most of the time would ask folks to look into the NRCS programs to help defray those costs. And once the contract's established, we'll go in and do the heavy lifting. And really, it's not about eradication. It's really about keeping the plant population low on the compounding curve, if you will. We still work in a lot of areas that are not too bad as far as invasive plants. We also work in areas that are pretty terrible, honestly. And it's the classic J-shaped curve. And if we can keep them low on the curve, I think it's helpful, timbering, logging, or any type of disturbance, whether it's man-made or natural, is going to promote these plants if you have them. So it's something I take pretty seriously. One of the first thinning jobs I marked in Norwich, Vermont, before I even knew what glossy buckthorn was, it blew up into a giant glossy buckthorn mess. And it was a couple years later that I actually had realized what the plant was, or Ginny probably finally got it through my skull, my thick skull, what it was. And it was just like, wow, we probably shouldn't have thinned this pine stand out. We've made this problem a whole lot worse, and we have to be a little bit smarter about how we approach stuff. And so that's how it's evolved for me anyways.
Jeff was wondering how a landowner would go about getting NRCS funding for invasive plant treatment.
Yeah, so there's a number of field offices, depending on where you're located. You'd want to find the office that's closest to you. It's often good to have your forester involved because they know your land and they may know where the plant populations are. It's very common for us to actually send a map, an ARC map with polygons or points on it to the NRCS staff, just to help get them headed in the right direction. I think it's very difficult for an NRCS staffer who doesn't know the land to just all of a sudden show up on a 100-acre property and be walking in blind. So that's typically what we're doing and helping. We do help a little bit with the actual applications, but not a lot. We usually do leave that up to the landowner, but the mapping part of it is good.
So Marcus, is eligibility the first step?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
If you make over $900,000 a year, you're not eligible for the NRCS.
And you get that eligibility through the Farm Service Agency? Is that correct?
That comes from the NRCS. Every parcel has to be mapped at the Farm Service Agency that goes through. So there's a couple different layers that you need to go through. And again, it's not uncommon for me to be sending shape files and maps to the NRCS, and there's that coordination. Once in a while, landowners definitely need to go down to the Farm Service Agency to map the property. But yeah, we're certainly there to help.
Mm-hmm.
So Jeff, I think if I remember, you're in Addison, so the NRCS office is in Middlebury. So you can contact them.
I'm in Chittenden.
Chittenden, okay, so I think it's in Essex then. And you can also work with Fish and Wildlife. If wildlife habitat is part of your goal, they have biologists that will help you with sort of the NRCS plan funding and application. And up in Essex, I think Andrea or maybe Dave Adams.
Dave Adams.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
Dave Adams, yeah.
I've had Andrea out here, actually.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
all right. Ted types in here, what is the difference between native and non-native buckthorn, and should I be concerned about both? And I think he may.
The
Yeah,
native buckthorn that I'm familiar with is called alder leaf buckthorn, and it's relatively short. It tends to grow in, say, the Cabot soils, usually really wet. It can be, say, knee high, and it's a native plant. I'm unconcerned, happy to see it. Common buckthorn, which I think, Ted, you've got a little bit kicking around your power line, is from Europe, and it's a wetland shrub, if you will, but it grows quite well in the upland sites. Now, Ted, most of your woods is pine and spruce, and there is a filtered light component there, and buckthorn will move in from that power line. It'll continue to grow on that compounding curve. So I'm concerned. Yep.
Well, that's interesting. As I was thinking too, it's like native and non-native honeysuckle. It's when you see the native, you're kind of excited, but it's what you mostly see is the non-native invasive. And I think that's true with buckthorn as well. What you mostly see is going to be the non-native invasive.
I think it depends on where you are.
Okay.
There are whole regions of the state that don't have much for non-native plants. A lot of the Northeast Kingdom is pretty clean.
That's true.
I was just in Woodbury, Vermont. There was a patch of knotweed, and I think that was it. That's all I saw. It was pretty good. But there are whole regions of the state where I would agree with you, Lisa, that most of what you see is not native.
Yeah, that's a good point about, I know when I first started, I was like, oh, south of Route 4 is where you have to worry about invasives. That's where it's really, really bad. And then as the years have gone by, it's like we said earlier when we were talking, it's followed those highways, it's followed our movement of wood, it's followed our movement of opening trails up where it goes in, and we see it creeping north. But it's nice to hear you saw very little when you were up in the kingdom. So let's keep our fingers crossed. And then those of you that are up there,
St. Johnsbury is getting busy.
okay.
The whole interstate corridor, unfortunately. Yeah.
All right, Logan types in, when removing multiple growths of buckthorn from the same root system, can you cut one shoot and apply herbicide to that one cut stump? Or do you need to remove all the shoots and treat all the stumps?
I would think that in most cases, we're talking about all stumps. If you cut a large one and you had a small, tiny shoot coming off of it, it would make sense to me that the whole thing would get knocked out. But for the most part, you would need to get every stump.
Okay. What about EAB? What are you doing with management as a consulting forester when you're considering EAB in the mix?
So we have been leaning on ash for a while now because we've known this is coming. About 7 or 8 years ago, the ash prices really started to come up, and it was already pretty obvious that the bug was gonna make it here eventually. So we have been harvesting it. I do have some clients. I have one client in particular that we just set aside ash. We're not cutting ash everywhere, and I don't want to cut every ash that's there. Barbara Schultz described to me when the bug finally gets into a stand and it's had time to do its work, that we're going to see, mortality rates in the 90+% range. There's going to be a relatively small number of trees that survive, but there will be some lingering ash. There'll be some that are maybe not resistant, but maybe tolerant is a better word. And so I don't think it's smart of us to cut all the ash. At the same token, if you have $20,000 of ash stumpage in your woods, I think most of us, especially with those of us who have kids in college, would it makes sense to go ahead and takes a decent amount. So we're nothing extreme, but we have been leaning heavier on ash. Ash pallet trees are not particularly valuable, so it is nice to leave trees in larger diameter, sizes. But for the most part, it's sort of that 20 to 15 to 20 inch breast height tree that the sawmills are really after. That we have been leaning on them heavy because we feel that a good amount of this is going to die.
Logan wants to know, can you explain the compound curve you referred to earlier?
Sure. So if you looked at Woodbury right now, where maybe you find one buckthorn on the field edge, and that would be low on the J-shaped compounding curve. And then if I could bolt you over to, say, East Montpelier, or maybe the Champlain Valley, where you have oodles of apple tree sized buckthorns, and you have crazy amounts of seedlings all over the ground, and you have a seed bed that is right full of buckthorn seeds. You would be well up that compounding curve. Every little disturbance is going to probably or a lot of it's going to get occupied by buckthorn. So that sort of just exploding population is what I refer to that J-shaped curve over time.
All righty. So Jeff wants to know, going to ash a little bit. He only has 10 to 15 acres of woodland. How much is each ash stump worth? I doubt it would be worth doing a timber cut. So, you know, what recommendations for him then?
I don't think there's anything wrong with not doing anything. If I had ash trees that were hanging over my house, I might think differently. If he's choosing firewood trees, I think ash would be a reasonable thing to choose. But I think it's okay, to let nature take its course over a lot of acreage. All the stream buffers, all the spots where we're choosing not to log that have ash. There's in boundary trees, there's plenty of them that are going to be ash trees that we're not harvesting. We want a significant amount of ash to be there when the beetle gets there, so we can find the ones that are going to be resistant or tolerant. So I actually would back up just a little bit. I'd like to talk about these introductions, and I'm not a huge global trade fan, mostly because of all these externalities that we continue to make. The chestnut blight was 1904 or 6, Dutch elm disease, beech bark disease, butternut canker, Cyrix wood wasp. They just found a square mile of Asian longhorn beetles in Worcester, Massachusetts. We as human beings, I would tell you that we're not terribly bright. I think APHIS honestly has probably reasonable rules in place, but I don't think it's enforced well enough. When we trade stuff that's biologically raw around the world, we are breaking ecological rules, and we're going to continue to make these mistakes. Going through this, this ash bug, these things come in different severities. This ash bug, like the chestnut blight, is pretty potent. There's very few out of 1,000 are gonna live through this, is my understanding. It's going to take some time. On the flip side, I read in my chestnut journal that somewhere around 3,000 years ago, from sediment cores in the bottoms of ponds, hemlock pollen 3,000 years ago in the Northeast dropped off the chart. Something evolved or showed up that had a taste for hemlock, and it took several hundred years, but hemlock restored itself to what it is today. And if you look at beech, or if you look at elm, there's still plenty of beech around. There's still plenty of elm around. They are sexually reproducing. There's some amount, or a significant amount maybe, of tolerance or resistance in that population. And I think both of those species are actively trying to work their way out of these introduced problems. I don't think ash is going to disappear from the landscape. I don't want it to. And we want ash, the survivors, to get large enough to sexually reproduce, and this cycle will begin. The biggest issue with these introductions to me is really the time scale. I mean, your grandkids and your great grandkids won't be swinging bats made out of ash trees. They won't know what a gorgeous woods grown healthy ash tree looks like. It doesn't mean ash is gone forever, but it's definitely effectively gone as a timber species and a member of the forest for a really, really long time.
Jeff notices, so with ash, he's seeing quite a few stressed ash in his area. He doesn't think he has EAB, but he's wondering if it's been a difficult year for ash because of the dry conditions that we've had, or if there's something else that might be out there.
It could be. There's another critter called ash yellows, which I think is a mycoplasma. It's basically a microscopic worm that lives in the soil. And there are whole regions of the state where ash has been in fairly poor health for a really long time. I remember driving down to southern Vermont 5 years ago and just being kind of shocked at how poor the ash looked overall in a lot of places. There's in Orange County where I live, Thetford Hill, the ash has looked pretty bad for a decade or more, as long as I've been paying attention. It's not EAB. I think as trees go downhill, then you get armillaria, root rot that moves in, that helps finish it off. But there are whole regions of the state where ash has been struggling for a long time.
All right. Wendy'd like to know, what has it taken to control black swallowwort in your experience?
Black swallowwort, I would recommend a foliar spray, and I would recommend either Garlon or glyphosate, and I would probably mix, if it's dry enough, I would mix a little bit of Escort XP into the mix, and it's a type of plant you're going to need to keep an eye on that location, but I've been pretty satisfied with several treatments that we've been actually able to extirpate that plant from certain sites.
Great. Ted wants to know if you have any tips for chervil control. He's had some successes with weeding and mowing, but it's a lot of ongoing work, and neighboring properties are swimming in it.
Good question, Ted. Chervil is not an easy plant to kill with herbicides, and I don't have a silver bullet for that particular plant. I remember Hugo and Cynthia Leitman, who some of you might know, when they were living in Randolph, they aggressively started hand pulling, and they actually asked the town to stop mowing the roadside. And in about 10 years, they actually had chervil under control in their location. Chervil, frankly, I don't know, Chelsea, Vermont, Randolph, Vermont, it looks awful. And I don't know. There's a number of these plants. I'm seeing a lot of purple loosestrife right now. There's a number of these plants where I think that would probably need a biocontrol eventually. Knotweed would fall into that as well. You can knock knotweed back, but it's at some point biocontrol I think is very tricky. And maybe it'll evolve on its own. But I think, yeah, we're in for the long haul with those plants I just mentioned.
All right. Sean Kelly shared that they're working with Dana, and they got an NRCS grant to deal with their invasives on 50 acres. He initially put our forest management plan together, and that's what they used to get the NRCS grant. So that's some of the peer-to-peer sharing that can occur on these phone calls. So that's Sean's experience with getting the NRCS grant to control their invasives.
Yeah, I would point out that the NRCS has money for management plans as well. So if you're on the ball and you realize that your plan is going to be due in a couple of years, it's good to start that process a year in advance. But you can sign up through the NRCS to help cost share the forestry plan development. It's a little bit more work for the consultant, and you have to be a technical service provider to be able to do this. But it's a terrific thing to do. So if you know when your plan's due, you go ahead, sign up, and get the NRCS help. And once you've done that, I think if you have resource concerns that you would like to have the NRCS help you with, invasive plant control, mass tree release, pre-commercial thinning, lots of different practices, good practices that they'll help you cost share, you're actually in a better position if you've gone through a forestry plan with the NRCS.
Awesome. I have a question for you. So, the long weekend's coming up. I want to be a weekend warrior and do good things in my woods. Well, I call you up and I say, Markus, what can I do in my woods this weekend?
What are your objectives?
I want to do good things.
How about enjoy yourself? You've worked hard all year long, and it's all about a sense of place. Whether it's botany that you love or deer hunting that you love, it's about, for most of us, it's about these, just being in nature. And I think actually COVID kind of highlights that we all sort of need to be in nature. If we can't be with other people, we might as well be in nature,
Well, there you go. I'll give everybody a task. Go out and walk your boundaries. Then you can enjoy your woods, and you should walk your boundaries every season is a recommendation I've heard before. So it might be something you try and do this weekend is walk your boundaries.
Yep.
All right, great. So tell me a little bit more about what's the process? So I'm a new landowner and I call you up and I say, hey, I'm a new landowner and I own these woods and now what do I do?
Well, if you have enough acreage and you're interested in the current use program, a lot of our work is generated through the current use program. So we usually start with a forestry plan, and so a lot of the young people in my office don't believe me, but in the old days, when folks would call me, if they couldn't send me a survey or a tax map, I would have to drive to the town clerk's office and pay $1 and photocopy the tax map. Some towns didn't even have tax maps, so you're just kind of plotting it on an ortho photo, just kind of fun. But now today, I can actually be talking to somebody, and if you even know the E911 road address, I can be chatting with you and bringing up these layers and actually figuring out exactly where your land is. And the tax map may be wrong. It may be a little bit, may not be perfect, but we can usually develop a field map pretty quick. And then we would, we'd systematically inventory the property. I definitely try especially the first management plan, to get around to the corners, try to GPS the corners, try to figure out what's marking the boundaries, whether it's stone walls or blazes or wire fence. Maybe there's nothing. Maybe we have a potential problem there that would have to be addressed. And then from there, inventory the trees, break it into stand types, and then hopefully develop a plan that meets your objectives and one that works for current use.
Alrighty.
Or it could be as simple as walking around, just going for a nice walk. So
It is always fun. That's one of my favorite things. Alicia wants to know if you have any tips on mapping trails or the property boundaries. Are there any tools that you really like to use? So you mentioned, Biofinder in our atlas. Is there anything else that you would recommend or strategies?
So we have ArcMap at the office, and probably most of you don't. And I'm actually not as familiar with the mapping programs as I probably should be. The ones that are available to the public. The new tool for us that has been a game changer in all aspects of our forestry work is using a PDF map, and then we download it. And the name of the program is escaping me. Avenza Maps. And so these PDFs, which are basically just pictures of the property that we develop on the computer, are referenced, so it's known it knows where they are in the world. And so when you're on the property with this Avenza Maps, there's actually a blue dot that is showing your location in comparison to the shape of the property. There's some functions on that program where I can pin a vernal pool. I can pin a bittersweet population that I bump into. I can also hit a track button, and as I walk, it'll lay out a track where we have walked. So it's been super helpful. I'm able to take those either line files or point files, email them to myself, and convert them to a shape file, and actually plug them onto the map. So literally, if you had an extensive trail system and you with your tablet or your phone, and you had your map, you could hit the trail or the tracking function, and you could track yourself, walk all your trails, and then email that to me, and we could throw that up on the map to a very high degree of accuracy.
That's very cool. Yeah, Avenza is quite the tool. We hope when we can get together in person again to do an Avenza workshop. So you would bring your phone with Avenza downloaded and work with someone like Markus to say, all right, this is how you would go about doing this. And
right.
Again, that's a hope for the future, and and it will happen. I have strong confidence in that.
Right.
Tim
You're actually even better. You're even better to work with a guy like Dana, because I'm kind of the old, I'm the old guard. I did not take a GIS course in college. I had to choose between GIS and entomology. I took entomology, and so I know how to run these things, but if we bump into any problems, I'm yelling for Dana quickly.
So we need both of you so that the other people don't feel like they can't do it. You know, they've got you as the old curmudgeon, and I say that apologetically, and Dana as the young digital guy. Tim would like to know, are there established mowing guidelines beyond waiting until August 15th for the sake of birds that can help us manage invasive or pollinators? So we're kind of getting a multi-approach to that.
That's a good question. I think one approach that I heard, because a lot of the more fallow fields, if you will, become really weedy with bed straw and other things. I have heard recently mowing potentially early if you can, and then letting that period of time go by that the bobolinks and the different things can happen. I don't know probably as much as I should, but I know nutrient management. I know bed straw. It is controllable with more aggressive mowing and the right fertilization. It probably varies depending on what plant you're dealing with. If it's black swallowwort that's showing up in your meadow, or bittersweet, I've seen it attack into fields. Your strategy would probably be different. So I'm probably not the perfect person to ask that question, but there's definitely people thinking about it, and there's some knowledge out there to be gained.
All right. Logan writes that he's starting to research which native shrubs or plants they want to introduce to their property after they get their buckthorn under control. Good job getting the buckthorn under control. How does American hazelnut fare in Vermont?
Oh, beaked hazelnut is great. It's terrific. In fact, that would be if you've got an invasive problem, that will grow in incredibly dense thickets in the right setting. So it'd be one that could definitely occupy that site, at least in places, and it's terrific for wildlife. So yeah, that's a great species.
Great. Also, you can go to vtinvasive.org, and it will show you, if you take out, buckthorn, here are some plants that you can plant, or plant this instead of that. So that's another resource. I'll put that in the chat box in a moment. Rich would like to know about poplar. He says, we have a bunch of poplar on our land, but most of it is mature. We have found, what have you found are the best techniques for successfully regenerating poplar? The time of year, area, size, aspect, does sun need to hit the soil, etc.?
Yeah, so if you want to regenerate poplar, I'm going to recommend that you do some patch cuts, some group openings. I would make them at least an acre in size. That's going to be sort of the minimum size for a species like the chestnut-sided warbler. You can absolutely go larger, but if you put these, not that you don't have to save some things in these openings that you create, but if you're very aggressive with the poplar, it will resprout aggressively from the root system, and you will establish a new cohort. In a lot of cases where I'm managing for timber, where I'm farming for, say, maple, I'm not actually interested in the poplar. Just putting on my strict timber hat. The strategy that I would use is actually not to cut all the poplar. Cut half of it, cut 2/3 of it, cut 1/3 of it, whatever combination it is. Leave trees, leave the ground shaded. The poplars may sprout from the stumps, but if they're in a partial or semi-shade environment, they'll usually decline. So, but poplar is a type of tree. If you wanna regenerate it, be aggressive.
Great. Larry has a great question. He says, do you see a path that allows landowners less than 5,000 acres to participate in carbon offsets?
That, I think, is evolving. I think it's actually quite fluid right now. I know, and I need to know more about, Charlie Hancock and Nancy Patch's work on the cold hollow to Canada. It sounds like that things are changing in that regard, and so I should know a little bit more than I do right now. But it sounds to me like there's some promise there for smaller landowners to be taking advantage of the potential carbon revenues.
Yeah, there are some carbon projects around the Northeast that are the non-regulatory markets.
Mhm.
So that's where that opportunity is for smaller land holdings that are aggregated.
Yeah.
And I know American Forest Foundation, Vermont Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy are working on some pilots around the Northeast. So I think we will see some of that come to Vermont for private landowners in the next couple of years, I hope.
Right. Right. It sounds like there's a lot of money that's available out there, and it's not been really accessible for most people. And it was the scenario that my father described to me was that there was a kind of a lump sum payment up front, but there was a lot of requirements going down the road. It seemed to me like it wasn't fair to future generations. But I think this is all changing, and so I would say stay tuned. I'm interested. I'm interested in a couple things. I'm not opposed to carbon. I think carbon forestry often does mean less logging, and so I am concerned about our consumerism. I do think that we all as humans, especially Americans, we all consume a unit of cordwood per year. We all consume a unit of paper products per year. We all consume a unit of solid wood. And I think I guess my message really is let's strive to produce the products that we use in our backyard and avoid these externalities of global trade. On the flip side, I am in favor of anything that will allow people to own woodland and to keep it woodland, and whether that's sugaring, whether that's timber management, whether that's carbon. Owning woodland is best if it makes financial sense.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds great. Let's see. Tim wrote a little bit about the carbon. Family Forest Carbon Program by TNC and American Forestry Foundation, Finite Carbon, Forest Carbon Works, and a couple of others are viable options. He's happy to provide an overview of current options where the market is headed. He says there's lots of confusion, but lots of potential opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great.
So,
yeah,
I think that's very true. Like you said, it's evolving, and we're going in that direction here, which is good. Like you said, to allow people to keep forest land and woodlands here in Vermont.
Yeah.
So, what other issues do you see, kind of on the horizon for landowners? You mentioned, future generations. How involved are you with your clients on helping navigate the idea of passing land to the next generation? You just said your brother bought your father's forest land. So you're kind of embroiled in that aspect. What advice or thoughts or concerns do you have to share with our audience?
That's I would the first thing I would do is I would tell you is that you need to start talking about your demise with your kids, because I've seen about everything that you can imagine. I have witnessed the families that are that love the land together, and it's not going to be a problem for it to be passed on. I've also witnessed scenarios where people didn't talk, and the kids. I remember one client of mine. She described the land as a fickle lover. She says, I don't want to get rid of it, but I can't afford to keep it. And so really talking to your children about the asset, and how they, their interest, figure out their interest level. And I think that's a difficult conversation to have. My family owns a camp in Maine. Actually, it's about to be sold. And I remember before my grandfather passed away, my father called a meeting together with all the siblings, and it was fascinating. I have 5 uncles and aunts, and they're all wonderful people. And I remember my aunts were in tears. I can't imagine this place without Dad. And I remember my uncles, who I absolutely adore. They're like, once the old man's gone, sell it. And it was just plain and simple honesty. And so that's probably step number 1. There are a lot of mechanizations towards protecting that land, and helping to transfer it between trust, conservation easements. There's some options there, but I think the key is that families have to be have to be talking about it, and there has to be, it has to be understood. And I think, frankly, some folks have to be ready for my uncle's, point of view. Is like, mom, dad, once you're gone, we don't ever see owning this. So you have to be ready, I think, as a landowner, that you might have this image that it's going to be the family parcel forever, and that may not be true. So I would say start there.
Have those conversations. Well, it's really good to know too that there are people who can help with those conversations. We often talk about through our Passing Lands pop-up, and I know Kathleen at VWA, they have a program to help have these conversations, to give you strategies for having these conversations, for assembling that team for passing land, because you want your forester like Markus involved, because they have that now for the idea of the forest, but for the future, because as we all know, forest clocks and human clocks do not operate on the same time scale. And so, is there a lawyer? Is there a family mediator that can come into that conversation if you need that? And there are some resources that both VWA and Coverts can help if you are in that boat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, let's see if anybody typed anything else yet. Oh, they haven't yet. Y'all are relying on me. That's not very fair. So Markus, tell me a little bit more about clear cut versus a seed tree release or crop tree release, and why would I pick different techniques for managing my forests over another? Like, how does it help me meet my objectives?
Okay. Well, I would look at that from a couple different points of view. I'd start with your soils. And if you are from Chelsea, Vermont, in some of these richer sites, if you log lightly, if you log heavily, you're probably going to regenerate sugar maple with ease. If you're from Fairleigh, Vermont, and your soils are more granitic, and if you do single tree removal, light removal, not controversial, you're probably going to regenerate heavy to beech, and so beech bark disease is a major bummer. So from my way of thinking on some of those granitic soils, oak and pine are two species that I think you'd like to maintain on those sites from a strict timber point of view. And so being more aggressive in those types of soils makes sense to me, to try and maintain a larger mix of species they'll be desirable. From the wildlife point of view, wildlife habitat is a little bit of a loaded term. I mean, there's certain species that benefit from heavy logging or heavy disturbance, and there's certainly species that fill the void in managed. I don't think there's many species that require old growth. I think the red-shouldered hawk might be one of them, but there's certainly late successional species. It kind of goes back to, for me, about the Audubon, Vermont, which is interesting. They are recommending that 3 to 5% of your ownership be in early successional habitat. So it's sort of Rich's comment about the poplars. So if you have 100 acres, they'd like to see 3 to 5 acres be in this early successional habitat, where there's going to be a suite of birds that'll utilize this recent disturbance for up to 20 years, and then the growth becomes too large, and the species are moving on. And so that's just all fascinating. As far as the silviculture goes, I guess it really depends on the soils and the species that you would like to maintain on that site.
Okay, great. Tim kind of has a question regarding that. He says he has a small, sorry, Ted just popped up. Let me get Tim's first. Occasionally a patch cut goes awry. I have 2 that were cut 6 years ago. No trees are growing, just grass, perhaps because it's wet and the soil is poor. Is there anything he can do to have the forest here other than lots of tree planting?
Interesting. You could, depending on your comfort, you could potentially knock out the grass with an herbicide and try to get mineral soil exposed, and you may have seeds come in from. We bump into this with like an old hayfield. The thatch is so heavy, so thick, that it really restricts the development of trees for a long period of time. You could potentially, I guess, do it mechanically if you could harrow it or plow it. It's probably about getting exposed soil and seed onto it would be my approach. You do see in places, close to where I grew up in Calais, you will see berry bushes or ferns occupy a site after disturbance, after logging, and in most cases, my experience has been it really delays the regeneration. And trees grow very, very slowly, little bits to bust through that herbaceous layer, and then once they get through it, then they're off to the races. And part of my theory why sugar maple veneer is not as common in Calais, Vermont, as it is in Chelsea, is that exact phenomenon. What you need for the development of veneer is intense competition early, where the trees grow thick and tall, and they lose their lower branches. And if you have ferns or herbaceous stuff that's holding back the development of the trees, you're going to have more open grown trees when they finally do develop.
Interesting. Let's see. Ted writes he has a small stand of locust trees that has migrated to an adjacent field this summer in the form of dense 6-foot saplings, an impenetrable jungle. Says he's been hand cutting, but it's not a long-term solution. What do you suggest?
So locust is, I guess it's native to the Pennsylvania area. Some folks definitely consider it non-native, at least in this region. I'm personally not that offended by the species. I think it's terrific firewood. It's fairly prickly when it's little, but it was brought here, I think, for fence posts. So if you have to get rid of the locust, and because it sprouts so aggressively, I think you're looking at a cut stump treatment where you're going to cut it and hit the stump with an herbicide. Maybe if it's small enough, you could get a mini excavator to rip it out. But cutting it, I don't by itself won't probably do it.
Okay, great. Let's see, we got time for one more question. Logan notes that he wants to know what some land management strategies that can help moose populations. He knows the brainworm and winter tick are giving them a hard time, so he'd love to keep moose in mind while he's managing his property as best he can. Do you have any suggestions for Logan?
Probably early successional habitat, patch cuts and clear cuts, food, and probably closer to water would be my guess. So maybe some of the same strategies you might use for, say, Canada warbler, you'd be utilizing for moose.
Great. Well, it looks like we're rounding on 10 o'clock. We do like to keep these to our hour. It's been great having you all on this morning. Markus, thank you so much for joining us. If you're not already signed up for VWA's and Vermont Covert's e-news, you can visit both of our websites and sign up for them there to learn about these and other programs that we offer together and apart. And we're really looking forward to seeing you on a future Friday morning. Our next one scheduled is actually for October 2nd. And we'll be chatting with Caitlin Cusack and Liz Walker from the Vermont Land Trust, kind of about that idea of passing lands to the next generation and conservation easements and understanding those kinds of things. So stay tuned for that. And again, we thank you all and wish you all a great holiday weekend. And again, Markus, if you have anything left to say, this is your chance.
I just say thank you, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime.
That sounds great. Kathleen?
Thank you, Markus. Good to see you all this morning. Great to hear from you. I always learn a lot.
All right, everybody. Bye. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
So long, folks.